No, it is crooked, according to the video, because I'm looking at myself in the screen right now. There we go. Now I'm ready. For the time I'm awake at the moment, and like shit I got to do today, and then go to sleep in a little while. So here I am, ready to flap my gums. And I'm going to tell you from the get go that I'm too humbled um, to be an expert on economics. I mean, I'm basically I'm basically an asshole with some opinions, just like everybody else on YouTube, on the left and on the right, and within the center. I mean, I'm no John Kenneth Galbraith, no John Maynard Keynes, no Adolf Reed. I mean, nor am I a Richard Wolff. I'm none of these people. They were, however, proven to be correct when it comes to successful economic models. Um, when it comes to the various schools of Leninism, I'm talking about the kind that's practiced by Joe Stalin or Leon Trotsky or Mao Zedong, Fidel Castro, yada, yada, yada. Um, that particular form of governance proven to be totalitarian, and it pretty much in itself a very inefficient system as well. If I had to make an exception when it comes to Marxist Leninism or communism, as a lot of people like to commonly refer to it, the only exception you'll ever find me making is Field Marshal Joseph Broz Tito of Yugoslavia. Um, if you want to consider his country communist during the 60s and 70s, all the way to the time he died in 1980, and he was the premier of Yugoslavia from the end of World War II till 1980. That might be the exception. That might be the communism that I would probably uh, be able to embrace for what I know about Yugoslavia. But as a general rule, while I'm not a cold warrior, knee jerk, right wing, paranoid, anti communist, I'm pretty critical of the communist system. And it's just not, that movement's just not for me. The economics of Milton Friedman, Steve Forbes, Thomas Sowell, um, John Stossel doesn't have very much appeal to me either, because it's kind of a very strident libertarian economic model. And just like Marxism, libertarian economics works great on paper, but human nature kind of tiptoe in there. And just like Marxism and libertarianism, you can't make that shit work. You just cannot make it work. And I think that many of them do believe that if we were to go and do that model of extreme free market um, private enterprise to that level, that will be the greatest way to promote social equality and spread prosperity to everyone. I just don't see it. To me, um, again, like Marxism, it doesn't add up. Now, let's talk about history for a moment. The Industrial Revolution, whereby both the United States and Britain became the economic miracle of the world, and that is without saying. And yes, that's the example. I think that a lot of people who praise the free enterprise system to its most ridiculous form look back in the 19th century and look at Britain and look at the United States and what they have done. And as I said, there was a lot of innovation that's happened, and not going to take that away. But there was a lot of lingering misery that went on. I mean, we had children that were working and being exploited with child labor. We had people that were just working all the time, 12, 15-hour days, 6 days a week. People living in shanty towns and misery, while the few were actually experiencing the life of splendor and luxury. And, and this is why the unions came along eventually to try to correct a lot of problems that was in existence in capitalism. And the thing about unions, a labor union, a trade union is not necessarily a socialist entity. You got people who belong to trade unions who are strong supporters of the free enterprise system. Eh, you got those within the trade union movement who take a view of economics that's considerably further left than I'm willing to embrace. But in Western democracies, I would say that for the most part, especially here in America, the unions are not far leftist entities. Um, they've been tremendously and unfortunately weakened in the last several decades. But the point is that they were needed then, and contrary to what some people, many conservatives, and even unfortunately too many liberals I hear today when they tell me, well, unions outlived their usefulness. No, we need unions more than ever. Well, um, what can I say? Well, by the 1920s, Calvin Coolidge, who was he was basically Ronald Reagan before there was Ronald Reagan, put the economy on hyper overdrive with fewer regulations and more free market approaches. And it was probably be the closest thing economically to a libertarian wet dream that took place under President Calvin Coolidge. Well, a lot of this led to the crash in 1929. Now, you hear the term Hoover shanty towns and things like that. Now, Herbert Hoover tried to impose some reforms within the system prior to FDR, and FDR actually campaigned as a fiscal conservative to Herbert Hoover in 1932. However, I think that if Herbert Hoover would have been reelected, he would have probably initiated some of the basic reforms FDR did. And how interesting that would have been, because that would have happened instead of the Democratic Party today being the center left party and the Republicans being the center right party. It could have been that all the everything, the left would have coalesced within the Republican Party, and the Republican Party would be where the Democratic Party is today, and the Democratic Party is where the modern day Republican Party is. I mean, I'm not saying that's exactly what would have happened. I'm just saying that's when you want to look at how alternate history works. It could have worked that way, or it could have been we would have probably still been a multi-party system, which I strongly still argue for. Well, FDR, as I said, got elected. And many conservatives to this day, especially conservatives who are revisionist as hell, and have been, especially, I've noticed this since Obama became president in 2008, and they will swear up and down, well, FDR, he prolonged the Depression. You know, we didn't need to go that route. This was America's first flirting with socialism. Well, Franklin Roosevelt was not a socialist. The New Deal was not a socialist. The New Deal was a reformist within the framework of our liberal conservative divide method toward solving the problems that was caused by the Depression. Now, did he co-opt some socialist ideas? Yes. This is why I say that both Eugene Debs, when he ran for president from 1900 till 1920, and Norman Thomas from 1928 to 1948 were probably the two most important historical figures, in my opinion, of the 20th century. Um, and between these two men, they have kind of shaped a lot of the progress America's made in the 20th century, I go back and look at Eugene Debs and Norman Thomas as playing a big role, even though they did not necessarily think of themselves in that role at the time. I give them that credit myself. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying, public works, infrastructure modernization, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Now, that area of the country had a lot of flooding problems, and the local communities were asking for companies to come in to repair that, to actually fix that. These companies did not find it profitable. But when the Tennessee Valley Authority was enacted, all of a sudden a lot of industrialists were pissed off and like, that's socialism. Well, where the fuck were they prior to that? They did not go there to go and correct the problem of flooding because it was not profitable to them. So someone had to do it, and it was the what the conservatives like to call the big bad federal government. Now, it's not like the Depression went away when FDR became president. This was a major problem, and the economy was fluctuating back and forth, and all that. It was something that could not be corrected within a 4 year or 8 year or period or what have you. And maybe I'll give some of the conservative revisionists a softly bit, just a little dash of credit when they said that World War II got us out of the Depression. It's true. The production created more jobs, and I remember when my grandmother was alive telling me how the economy of her family tremendously improved during World War II. But here's the thing about that: the infrastructure was there. It was modernized. The United States became more modernized as a result of what FDR was doing in the 1930s. So you had an efficient way to actually have capital work within what I would call the public-private partnership. We got out of the Depression. We would have gotten out of the Depression anyway. But so, as I said, maybe a dash of credit there, but they're still mostly wrong when they say that FDR did nothing to get us out of the Great Depression. They're full of it. Now, what I was going to say, from basically the end of World War II to the rise of Ronald Reagan, President Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and I'm going to say shaky with Jimmy Carter, but still put Jimmy Carter in that mix. And what I'm saying is there was a New Deal consensus, that there was not a whole lot that either party would do to dismantle the progress that was made with FDR's reform. Sort of like in Great Britain, what Clement Attlee did from 1945 to 1951, the various prime ministers from Winston Churchill's return to 10 Downing Street in 1951 to the unfortunate election of Margaret Thatcher in 79, there was that labor consensus. Both Labor and Tory governments did not do too much to privatize or dismantle the welfare state or declare war on the trade unions in the way that Margaret Thatcher did. Now, the only good thing I'm going to say about Margaret Thatcher, when you compare her to Reagan, we didn't have a national health program. Great Britain did. She didn't. The one thing she kind of kept intact, more or less, was the National Health Service. So I told conservatives here in the United States when Obamacare came out, if I had a time machine, if I had a choice between living in Bill Clinton's during the Bill Clinton presidency as his most liberal and the Barack Obama presidency during his most liberal time, or the heyday of Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, I would choose Margaret Thatcher's Britain in the 1980s because they had a national health service. This country didn't. So, and even after Margaret Thatcher savaged the unions, which makes her a horrible person, the unions in Britain, compared to the United States, is still just a little bit stronger than it is here in the United States. And that doesn't mean that I love Margaret Thatcher. I think she was the worst thing that ever happened to Great Britain. But here in the United States, we saw a decline, and it probably had a lot to do with the oil embargo, and it was a slump on the economy. By the time Jimmy Carter came in, he had this kind of weird populism as an outsider. So there was a little bit of deregulation, and I think in the mindset that this deregulation was a weird kind of populism. Now he was still progressive compared to Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and Joe Biden. He was still progressive in comparison, but there was a mindset that was slowly changing at that time. And then when Reagan came along, he was like outright honest about trying to dismantle all the gains from the New Deal. And yeah, it didn't happen overnight, but over the years, we have seen the unions decline, and we have seen the deregulation of Wall Street and the disaster it has caused. Um, and I mean, and until George W. Bush came along, nobody was more of a anti Ronald Reagan hater than me. Um, and for different reasons, I will go along and say still George W. Bush was the worst president because he took what was shitty about Reagan, and you know it was proven to be a failure. He just kind of kept it going, and add way more war than even Reagan would have wanted. Um, well, you have corporately managed trade. Well, Bill Clinton is responsible for our jobs manufacturing base, which was already declining, went into massive decline. Now, it would have happened anyway because George Herbert Walker Bush and Bill Clinton were both supporters of NAFTA. NAFTA was going to pass no matter what. Um, and it just went on worse. And every time you hear about a new trade deal, it's corporately managed. It's always corporately managed. And then let's not forget medical inflation. Medical inflation, which is the biggest problem in this country. It doesn't get any cheaper. And then you hear people who are sick, or people who are diabetic, or have cancer, and they can't afford. And I'm talking about right leaning people who let the American political Overton window cloud their judgment towards stupidity. Now I'll hear them say, it's expensive to go to the doctor, it's expensive to go to the hospital. But as soon as you mention universal health care, I don't want that socialized medicine, even if it's going to make me feel better. And really, that's how it translates to me. It's really, really just infuriating. Well, because of the corporatism that became the Reagan consensus, that Reagan, Bush one, Bill Clinton, Bush two, Barack Obama can't, embrace. Well, populism kind of made a comeback in two directions, on the left and on the right. On the left, Bernie Sanders came along, the former mayor of Burlington, Vermont, the former U.S. House of Representative member from 1991 to 2007, and currently a U.S. Senator from Vermont from 2007 to the present. He ran for president. He challenged Hillary Clinton and challenged her on the Reaganization of the Democratic Party that she and her husband Bill Clinton played a role in, and made the Democratic Party the piece of shit that it became. Um, Bernie Sanders challenged her on that. And unfortunately, that was the first time Bernie Sanders got cheated in the presidential race in the primaries. He was cheated again in 2020. On the right side, Donald Trump, who really didn't have a strong core of beliefs prior to his running for president, or prior to Obama, shall I say, where he was a mix of Reagan-style conservatism, Ross Perot style populism, and occasionally a little bit of social progressivism on the side. At one time, Donald Trump embraced single payer Medicare for all. Now, I remember when he embraced that in 2000. Donald Trump is an asshole today, but I want that Donald Trump of 2000 when he was smart on issues like healthcare. But the Donald Trump to today, well, he can go to hell. but uh, but anyway, the he came in there and he acquiesced to everything that was horrible and shitty about the modern day Republican Party, he embraced that and did some of that pro style populist rhetoric, and maybe even borrowed cynically borrowed some of the non-controversial populist positions of Bernie Sanders. And in some weird way, when he was campaigning in 2016, he campaigned in some ways to the left, slightly to the left of Hillary Clinton. In some ways, he campaigned to the right of Pat Buchanan. It was a really strange candidacy that he had, and unfortunately he won. Uh, and then when he won, instead of going with the populist themes that he claimed he supported, he ended up governing like an establishment Republican, to the point that a never Trumper like Ben Shapiro in 2016 hated Donald Trump, but in 2020 enthusiastically supported Donald Trump. I would say that in the political demographics, one of the worst people around were the 2016 never Trumpers who became pro Donald Trump sycophants because he ended up governing in a way that they want a president who's a Republican to govern. They just want that Republican to have the demeanor of Mitt Romney, not be the Twitter troll that he became over the last several years. Donald Trump's policies suck, but I didn't mind the Twitter trolling. That part at least was funny. It was the policies were damaging, but it was funny. But getting back to what I was saying, the populism, that's where the populism, the age came into being. And unfortunately, because we had too much of Donald Trump and because Bernie Sanders was defeated in the primaries, we're back to normality. And I think the COVID and Donald Trump's shabby treatment of this COVID crisis was a call for a return toward the status quo. The status quo is what brought us Donald Trump in the first place. And I wish that people will realize that, especially if you don't like Donald Trump, you should realize that the status quo previous to Trump was what brought us Trump. And if we go down this road toward normalcy and we go back to the same old with no beneficial results, you're going to get another Donald Trump. You're going to get a more competent, smarter Trump. You're going to get a Donald Trump with a demeanor of Mitt Romney. You're going to get a Donald Trump but with the name Ted Cruz or Tom Cotton or Mike Pence. And all of them, to me, is much worse than Donald Trump because they're more competent and they're smarter and they're actually more ideological. And that is a recipe for disaster. Now, I want to talk about communism for a minute. Communism, or what I call the command economy, like the Soviet Union from 1917 to 1991. There was a lot that can be said about the Soviet Union. I am mostly critical of the Soviet Union. I can mention a few times in their 70 years as a nation where they were, quote unquote, not the bad guys. Obviously, World War II kind of being an example, but I would say that even in places like Afghanistan, looking at that conflict, I would have preferred Afghanistan under Soviet influence than it would be under the influence of radical theocratic Muslim fanatics like what became the Taliban government that kind of exists, which proves that what the United States did in the last 20 years is a failure and they need to withdraw. But then again, the Soviets couldn't cut the mustard either when it comes to their war with police action rather in Afghanistan. But the communist model, or what I call the command economy, pretty much proven to be inefficient. There were some benevolent things that exist under communism, most notably, when they have a civil society, as was the Soviet Union, or even Cuba, where housing is not a problem, everybody gets education, everybody gets health care. Those are the good things about communism. But, executions are not a good thing. Silencing of free speech is not a good thing. Suppression against the LGBTQ community is not a good thing. Suppression of people's religious beliefs is not a good thing. Micromanaging the lives of every individual is not a good thing. Um, so an authoritarian left wing state is not a good thing, just as an authoritarian right wing state like Germany under Hitler in World War II, or Mussolini's Italy, or Franco's Spain, or Pinochet's Chile, and what could debatably be Jair Bolsonaro's Brazil. I don't know how that's going to transpire, but I do know that he's bad news, Jair Bolsonaro. Um, as I said earlier, Tito, Yugoslavia was the exception when it comes to communism, because Field Marshal Tito started to democratize Yugoslavia in the 1960s and 70s. And while it was not the welfare state or social democracy of Western Europe, it wasn't the authoritarian system of the Soviet Union either. If I have to compare it, I would compare it to a post-Maoist China, but way more socially liberal within their society than China is. China has not given up on the social authoritarianism. Um, let me go on about the mixed economy. Now, one of the first example of an actual mixed economy, which blend capitalism and elements of socialism, was, I would say, Germany under Otto von Bismarck, and because of his fears of the Social Democratic Party in Germany, um, they created what I believe might have been the world's first welfare state, or the welfare state of modern times. I would say in America, in a very limited way, we've had some success, such as the I would call it sewer socialism. People like the municipal socialist governments in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Daniel Hone, Frank Zeidler, you get the idea. Or later on, as a juxtaposition to Reaganism in the 1980s in Burlington, Vermont, when Bernie Sanders became the elected socialist mayor and was extremely successful as the mayor of Burlington, Vermont. Um, Sweden became one of the first nations to get out of the Great Depression. In 1932, with the election of the Social Democrats and the welfare state being constructed in Sweden, and their progressive taxation and spend policies, they were able to carry Sweden out of the Great Depression in the 1930s. Um, Great Britain, 1945, devastated after World War II. The Labor government of Clement Attlee came in, massive nationalization, the creation of the welfare state, the National Health Service created. The world's most capitalist country in the world, arguably at the time, had a healthy dose of socialism that was proven to be good and never needed to be discarded. Unfortunately, Margaret Thatcher happened. Um, Palestine, which became Israel in 1948, the kibbutz movement. Regardless of what your take is on the Israeli-Palestinian issue today, and the Israeli government needs to treat the Palestinians way better than they do, and they need to withdraw from the West Bank. And I am for the two-state solution. I am for the two-state solution, and that means the secular moderates on both sides need to be one negotiating. That means no Likud in Israel, and that means no Hamas in Gaza needs to be legitimized. Neither of them, and they're both the problems. Um, but 1948, Israel was more or less established as a socialist state. Jewish social democrat, uh, Jewish social democratic Zionists and Jewish communist Zionists created Israel, and it was, as I said, it was created more or less as a socialist state. Unfortunately, by the 1970s, Israel will swing right, occasionally swing back to the left, but they've been swinging back left and right, and for the longest time have unfortunately remained on the right. Um, in Canada, let's see, Canada's in Saskatchewan in 1944, the election of the premiership of Tommy Douglas's government, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, which will become known as the New Democratic Party of Canada. And they, while the New Democratic Party of Canada never became a major party, it was always been a strong third party, has kind of kept the Canada on the left politically in most areas. And and I just wish that the United States be more like Canada. Well, let's go to the Reagan Thatcher era. As I said, Reagan Thatcher era kind of affected the West in a lot of ways. And I would say that unfortunately, in many ways, we're still in the Reagan Thatcher era. Thatcher in the UK assault the unions, dismantle a lot of public entities, auction them off in the private sector. Uh, Helmut Kohl more or less did the same thing as the Chancellor of Germany, and I believe it was in 1998. He was defeated. Stephen Harper in 2006 came in, was also sort of Canada's Ronald Reagan, Canada's Margaret Thatcher. John Howard of Australia was worse than Australia's Reagan and Thatcher. He was more like Australia's George W. Bush. Chile, 1973, on, ironically enough, 9/11. The first 9/11. U.S. government assisted the Chilean military, and the socialist government of Salvador Allende was toppled. And for 17 years, Pinochet was the tyrant that ruled Chile. Everything was privatized, and that's not hyperbole. Unions were banned. Left-wing parties were also banned. There was torture detainment camps where they were torturing left-wing dissidents. One of the methods of executions was referred to as helicopter rides, where they would take political dissidents, hop them on the helicopters, and literally shove them off the helicopters, and they fallen from the sky to their death. That was Augusto Pinochet. And eventually Chile returned to democracy around 1990. But whenever I hear conservatives get mad when socialists or even some left-leaning liberals say, "Well, I don't particularly like everything they do in Cuba, but healthcare, education, housing has been a good thing." Well, what are you, some kind of a communist? Well, these same people who criticizes the left for their occasional or for the few benevolent things that were done under communist countries are the same people that would go and say, "Well, I didn't like everything that Pinochet did, but I like the fact that he handled the economy and he had that Milton Friedman Chicago School of Economists running the country, and that's the way it should be around here." I mean, it's that mindset, but it's okay when they do it. But the left does it. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness, uh, you know. Well, the what I was going to say. Now, mixed economy. Now, over my years, and I have corrected myself saying this, I have referred to many European countries and many Western countries around the world with their universal healthcare system and strong unions and welfare state as socialists. And maybe I'm a little bit too wrong-headed to call it socialism. And the name's been debated by many on the right. So while the right has been too busy acting like if you're to the left of Ted Cruz, you're some kind of a communist. Whereas people like John Stossel and Ben Shapiro changed their ideological tactic over the years, and they started to say things like, "Well, I hear Ben Shapiro say." Many supporters of Bernie Sanders will say that Sweden, Denmark, and Norway are socialists, and they're not really socialists. They're capitalist states with a welfare system and high taxation that still are capitalists. And then you go and challenge Ben Shapiro, tell him, "Hey, let's try that system. Then don't worry about the semantics. Why we can't do that because that's socialism." But then you hear talk about lower corporate tax rates and certain certain regressive tax systems they have, and the fact that some of these countries don't have a minimum wage. They like that part about it. But the reason why those countries cannot have an existing national minimum wage law is that the unions are strong enough to keep the wages high. But you see, the Ben Shapiro's of the world wants to eliminate the minimum wage for the United States, but they also want to eliminate unions too. So when I look at someone like Ben Shapiro, I want to say Ben Shapiro can fuck himself. So and I you didn't hear me stutter intentionally saying that. But the thing about it is that these countries have what we don't have here in the United States, other than not having a national health care system or strong unions. The United States lack a center left party. I know. What about the Democrats? The Democratic Party would probably be closer to the UK Tories and to the right of the UK Tories in Great Britain. And when I say to the right, because even many Tories in the UK are cool with the National Health Service. You try getting Nancy Pelosi or Bill Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden to say, "Hey, let's have Medicare for all." They don't even want a public option, even though they will try to hint at it every once in a while. But here's the thing: this mixed economy, you want to call it the welfare state, you want to call it whatever you want to call it, this model has prevented from making communism palatable in many of these countries, and has prevented these countries from a return to a sort of fascism. And and my message to U.S. liberals and social democrats in other countries is that you need to move away from corporatized neoliberalism or the third way. You need to move away from that Bill Clinton model in the US. You need to move away from that Tony Blair model in the UK. And social democracy needs to be social democracy again. Liberalism must be New Deal liberalism again. But in the US case, we need New Deal liberalism, but push it further left. If you like what you heard, press like and comment. Comment any way you don't like it. We'll have a conversation. Feel free to share the content on this channel. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you that if you're passionate about something, create that platform, utilize it because we're the muckrakers of our time. And hit that subscribe button, that notification bell to keep up to date with my rambling and rants. And until next time, peace and Bernie Sanders for president in the year 2024.